Jets, good to see you again. Our topic today is barbecues on decks, but also way beyond that, of course. With the weather getting better, when you're an underwriter, you start worrying about what happens during the summer on apartment decks. And Chris, you've done some work recently and built a little data set about apartment building conditions. And so tell us a little bit about what prompted that, and then we can just talk about our experiences.
Apartment deck fires are historically kind of ubiquitous. They just always seem to happen when barbecues are allowed on decks in apartment complexes. So we went, we got a master list for the apartment complexes in the state and virtually inspected them with relatively new photos to see if they had barbecues on their decks or not, and collected a database that it includes that information along with the type of railing, whether it's flat panel or horizontal, as horizontal is often a problem for kids and some adults climbing on. And also we collected some information on roof condition and overall condition of the property. We were able to look at about 3,200.
What did you find?
We found about 1 in 10-ish apartment complexes has barbecues obviously on the decks. The maintenance issues were about 1 in 15 that were obvious and probably needed attention. And the railings, about 4% of the buildings we looked at did have horizontal railings. It hasn't completely worked its way out of the system, and still new construction is going in with them. They appear not to be outside of code, but many insurance companies look at them as a liability hazard.
Why I think your work is so powerful, Chris, is while I believe independent agents are doing the right thing and asking the right questions, I think a lot of apartments have learned the right answer, so to speak, is that like these things cause fire. Do you have a policy against these? Yes, of course we do. But the difference is are they enforcing those own policies, or are they answering? Do they have a policy in place that's not being enforced? So doing an actual check to see if it's being enforced, that's the most important thing.
I think, Chris, since you really brought this topic to light, I just from driving around in my town down the main street, I look left and right, and many of them are condominiums. I'm not sure that's material to this, but I see them all over the place, a heck of a lot more than 1 in 10. And since reading the posting on the Graham Fire District website about the recent legislative activity in Olympia, I've become much more conscious of this issue. And given the numbers, I just figure what ember is going to float up next and cause a problem. One of these wood decks. I guess once we're more aware of this thing, it can be a really disturbing exposure.
What created an issue for me, handling these claims is like buildings are designed, especially with current codes, to prevent fires from spreading floor to floor. Whether it's fire blocks in the walls, internal doors that have a high fire rating to prevent it going, up. When it starts on the balcony, it's a quick rollover, and you're going to affect multiple floors, and then quickly increase the severity of any loss.
My last company, now this is prior to some of my other companies, but Capital Insurance Group, some of you worked there as well. We wrote a lot of habitational, and the biggest losses we had were those deck fires, usually barbecue driven, driving up through multiple stories into the attic, and then the whole buildings were totals. And when you've got 16 to 20 units, either with water damage or fire damage, you start writing big checks pretty fast. And so, yeah, it's a big deal. If you've not underwritten apartments before, this is probably the single biggest thing you should worry about. Both my adult kids live in apartment complexes that have those same rules Scott talked about. And guess what? You drive into their complexes and there's barbecues on multiple decks in those places, and no one's enforcing it. And so the work that Chris has done to help us see those and to provide that for our customers, I think is exceptional. It's an exceptional idea.
We talk about property damages. The thing that really spooks me about this exposure is the concentration of life and the life safety issues of all these people asleep or whatever inside of these buildings that can go up so quickly.
Those losses add up quick. with multiple families affected, displaced, loss of use. You know, and when all things work correctly, right? I mean, that you kind of anticipate in a multi-story building, there's a fire on floor 5. Floor 5 is going to be a total, right? Floor 6, 50% of it's going to be damaged by smoke. 25% on floor 7 is going to be damaged by smoke and dissipating. And then you get the stuff beneath. You're going to have 50% damage from water on the floor underneath, 25% damage from water on the floor underneath that. And so if you're allowing this fire to go from multiple floor to floor, now you're impacting those percentages across multiple levels. So again, it adds up very quickly.
Yeah, and the concentration of life, and you're combining that with, you've got a lot of people in one spot, and when you're only as good as your most careless tenant with a barbecue on the deck, the risk is pretty high. So the exposure is real, and the season is upon us.
I made reference earlier to the Graham Fire District posting, and it was just an update about some legislative activity in Olympia, where a law, or I should say, a law had passed the legislature and was waiting for signature. I believe that's what the stage was. That's where the stage was. And it was to establish codes that prevented this kind of thing from occurring. But it was reversed. It's a curious occurrence. So, but we like our barbecues, right?
Well, there's powerful lobbying groups out there. We definitely need to acknowledge that and understand that. And that's why the additional work we're trying to do to isolate these things for our customers. The second pair of eyes never hurts. Third, fourth, and fifth's even better. And so the more our customers ask us to help them, the more we get excited about just doing that as part of what they already pay for us to do, which is provide them with the data and information to rate policies. But we can certainly help them with the underwriting side of it as well.
What do you see when you look at an apartment building and there are no barbecues on a balcony?
I think they're inside. I'm just kidding. What I would say is when I see that, that's one I want to write. Now, typically it's a newer one and they are strict.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody living in a place, where whatever the rules are, right? Whether it's a no smoking or whatever those rules are, the people paying those fairly higher rates for those kind of apartment complexes with those rules expect them to be actually adhered to.
That's the point, though, right?
That's the point. I mean, usually
that you benefit as an apartment building owner because of the mentality, what you just illustrated.
Absolutely. I mean, if there are discounts that insurance companies provide for companies who have those kind of policies in place and enforce them. And so the premium will be typically lower, which is great, but your tenants will actually feel more secured there and will probably renew their leases if you're actually abiding by the rules that you've established for everybody, right? So I think that, yeah, I get excited when there's a newer apartment complex that actually does what they say they're going to do. I want to write that all day long. The ones who don't, I just figure I can either enforce the actions or I can go find another place to play.
I did find, unfortunately, that newer complexes were not exempt from barbecues. While older complexes tended to be more of the total return, I found newer complexes to be overrepresented from what I expected. So it pays to check.
I just found it curious, Chris, and this only comes from your detailed observation of, I don't know, some 2,500 units in the state of Washington, that they're still putting horizontal railings on new apartments. I mean, I haven't met one child that doesn't see a horizontal railing, and it's just they can't stop themselves from climbing it.
I'm saying child. I mean, come on now. I could see Scott Elliott climbing a couple of those babies just to see how easy his feet fit. So
not for fun, but if I wanted to hang a plant, I would definitely not. I would say I'm going to save myself 10 minutes and not get my ladder out. I'll just use this railing, and I would dangle myself precariously off the edge.
Absolutely.
So you're absolutely right, Brian.
It'd be interesting to see if there was a contrast between condominiums that were, multi-level condominiums versus apartment homes, because just based on what I saw plenty of condos with barbecues, and I just wonder if, you know, how this, in that case, the homeowners association has got some work to do, right? As opposed to a third party manager.
Yeah, I would agree, Joe. If you can put the rules in place, which I think you could for an HOA, right? The HOAs have rules.
Yep.
If you were to say, let's not have barbecues on decks because of the potential fire and the savings to the HOA association premiums, as well as individual condo owners premiums, you'd think that'd be worth it. But there's still barbecues on decks for condos as well as apartments. And so I know the answer is knowledge from an underwriting perspective. And I think our goal more than anything is to, right, our goals are to make people aware of an issue so they can adequately underwrite that issue, price it or whatever, manage the risk. Ultimately, though, it'd be nice if these were prevented, so you prevented A, losses, and B, loss of life, because that's cascading effect of a fire on a balcony is typically you're not going to have the smoke detectors going off until it's a biggie, and then you're causing some trouble for your tenants, and that's never a good thing.
The stick was about forcing wet towels over the railing. A little little looser on the
I'm okay
barbecue.
with
I
that.
find that ironic.
Well, I think you raised a great point, Joe. And if our customers find great value in the work Chris did on apartments, maybe it's something that we could look into the condos in the state as well.
Might be the next step.